Hello garden gals and guys, welcome back to the Fat Earth Backyard Farm. Okay, so tomatoes. And this video is probably going to be a little longer than 2 minutes. You want to stake your tomatoes as they grow. So you can use anything. You can use pantyhose. You can use twine, gardening twine. You can use this kind of specialized little rubber tape that you can use. You just don't want anything that's going to cut into the plant and cause damage. And you can find stuff at your gardening center. So I found these things a few years ago. You see these little green garden clips? And they just wrap right on around the stem. And then if you can see that on the other end, you just push it together. And I found these about 3 years ago, and I just reuse them, and they work wonders. And they also give the enough space for the stem to be able to grow and not be all crowded and everything. And you want to put your stakes in the ground. If you haven't put them in, it's okay to put them in now, but just be careful that you put it away from the main stalk so that you don't disturb the roots of the plant. Okay. Now when I planted, I put the stakes in the ground first, and then I planted the tomatoes next to them. So that way the stakes were in the ground and I didn't have to worry about disturbing the roots of the plant. The next thing I want to talk about is thinning the plants out. You can see I did a lot of thinning here. And the reason I do that is because when you have stems that hang to the ground like this one, and you water your plants, well, the soil is a living, breathing thing. And there are good bacteria and good insects and microbes, but there are also mold spores and fungi. And when you water, those mold spores can splash up onto the plants that are touching the soil or really low to the soil and cause the plant to have, issues. So this one I'm not going to cut simply because there's a lot of tomatoes on this vine. So I'm going to probably stake this up to the plant. But what I am going to do is these here, this one here, and you just want to follow to the base of the stem, okay? And then just snip it off. You don't want to try and tear it off with your hands because tomatoes get pretty tough and you'll end up damaging the plant. And what's left is just this little bit of a stump, and that will heal. So I go through and I just, I cut them off like that. And then I don't leave these in the garden just in case there's any disease on them. I just throw it away. So, those are your 2 tips for growing tomatoes. And I like to thin my tomatoes out because they just get so bushy and unwieldy. And you really don't need all of the branches that stick out. And you just want to be careful. Like, I would not cut this one because if you follow this one back, you can see that there are tomatoes growing on that one. Now, here's another tip. This right here, you see that? That's called a sucker. And it grows between the Y of the main stem and the branches that come out. I pinch these off with my hand while they're little. This is a big controversy in the gardening world. Some gardeners say leave them. Some gardeners say, pinch them. I pinch them because most of the times what I've found is that those suckers don't produce tomatoes. And so they just make the plant kind of, bushy. And I like to keep my tomato plants thinned out so that more energy can go into the tomatoes and the tomatoes themselves can get bigger. Because the more branches you have on the tree, the more energy the plant has to put into growing all those leaves. So you can see this one is really kind of thinned out, and that's the way I like it. This one isn't as thinned out because this thing is called a Candyland tomato, and it's lots of little cherry tomatoes, and there are just blooms everywhere. So I can only thin this out, but so much. So those are my tips. And look, see, I already have a little tomato. But those are my tips. Stake before you plant. Cut off the bottom branches to keep fungi and things from splashing up onto the leaves. And pinch off the suckers. Absolutely. So that is my advice to you, and this is my garden. Everything is growing really well so far. And I even planted some onions in this bed, as well as the onions that I have planted over here, which I did a video about how to plant them this past Sunday. And you can see they're doing pretty well. So that's it for now, garden gals and guys. Until next time, happy farming.